The grand chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet. Hundreds of representatives from 8 powerful civilizations sat in their designated sections, their various forms creating a tapestry of scales, feathers, crystalline structures, and features that defied easy description. At the center of the massive room, floating holographic displays showed the familiar blue and green sphere of Earth, rotating slowly as if unaware of the judgment being passed upon it. Ambassador Zilnoth rose from his seat, his reptilian body moving with the careful precision of someone accustomed to command. His scales gleamed under the chamber's lights as he activated the central podium. When he spoke, his voice carried through translation systems into dozens of languages simultaneously. "We gather today to address a crisis that threatens the stability of our galactic order," Zelnoff began, his tone grave. "The species known as humans have violated every protocol we have established over millennia. In a mere 80 years since achieving faster-than-light travel, they have spread to 47 star systems. They ignore our colonization schedules. They disregard our territorial guidelines. They refuse to acknowledge the natural hierarchy that has maintained peace for thousands of years." The displays shifted, showing images of human colonies, bustling space stations, terraforming operations, ships moving between stars with apparent disregard for the invisible boundaries the Council had drawn long ago. Emperor Vorkath of the Vorthak Empire stood next, his towering form casting shadows across nearby seats. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his presence commanded respect born from centuries of rule. "The Council has been patient," Vorkath said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. "We extended diplomatic contact. We offered them membership under our guidance. We explained the proper way to expand into the galaxy. They smiled, nodded, and continued doing exactly as they pleased." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This cannot stand. Species who refuse to learn their place become dangerous to everyone. History has taught us this lesson in blood." In the small section reserved for Earth's diplomatic mission, Ambassador Claire Martinez sat with perfect stillness. She was in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple style and eyes that had seen more negotiation tables than most people see in a lifetime. Beside her sat 3 other human diplomats, all watching the proceedings with expressions that seemed almost too calm. The holographic displays now showed comparative data. The Vorthak Empire had taken 200 years to establish their first 20 colonies. The silicon-based Lithians had needed 300 years. Even the aggressive Kreelan had followed a measured expansion schedule, and here were humans, spreading like wildfire across the stars in less than a century. "They are reckless," continued another council member, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline matrix. "They establish colonies on worlds without proper environmental studies. They accept any species who wishes to join them. They share technology without considering the consequences. They are chaos given form." Zelnoff pulled up another set of images. Human traders at alien markets. Human engineers working alongside species the Council barely acknowledged. Human doctors treating patients of a dozen different biological configurations. "Most concerning of all," Zelnoff said, "is their utter disregard for proper hierarchies. They treat newly spacefaring species as equals. They form partnerships with civilizations we have classified as insufficient for contact. They disrupt established trade relationships with their unusual concept of fair dealing." Claire felt a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She kept her face neutral, but it was getting harder. "Therefore," Emperor Vorkath declared, his voice filling every corner of the vast chamber, "the Galactic Council has reached a unanimous decision. Humanity must submit to Council authority immediately. You will cease all unauthorized colonization. You will recall your ships to your home system. You will accept Council oversight on all matters of expansion, trade, and diplomatic contact. You will learn to exist within the framework that has kept the galaxy stable for millennia." The chamber fell silent. Every eye, sensor, and perception organ turned toward the small human delegation. Zelmoth's voice cut through the quiet. "Ambassador Martinez, the Council recognizes you. You will now acknowledge Earth's acceptance of these terms." Claire stood slowly. She walked to the speaker's platform with measured steps, her simple blue suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and armor worn by the alien dignitaries around her. When she reached the podium, she looked around the chamber, meeting gazes where possible, acknowledging the various representatives, and then, despite every diplomatic instinct telling her to maintain composure, she began to smile. The smile became a chuckle. The chuckle became genuine laughter. Behind her, she heard one of her fellow diplomats trying to suppress a snort. Then another gave up and laughed outright. Within moments, all 4 humans were laughing, the sound echoing strangely in the massive chamber. The alien representatives looked at each other in confusion. This was not the response they had anticipated. Fear, perhaps. Anger, possibly. Desperate negotiation, certainly. But laughter? Claire composed herself, though her eyes still sparkled with amusement. "I apologize," she said, not sounding particularly sorry. "It's just that this is perhaps the most impressively misguided ultimatum I've encountered in 20 years of diplomatic service." Zelnoth's scales rippled in what his species displayed as irritation. "You find your situation amusing?" "Oh, tremendously," Claire replied. She tapped a podium, and her own holographic display appeared. "You've done your research on humanity, clearly. You know how many colonies we have. You know how fast we've expanded. You've tracked our ships and documented our activities." She paused. "But you've completely missed what we've actually been doing all this time." Emperor Vorkath leaned forward. "Explain yourself." "Not yet," Claire said pleasantly. "You've given us quite the presentation. You've shown your evidence. You've made your demands. Now, in the interest of fairness, I request 30 days to prepare Earth's formal response to the Council's ultimatum." "There is nothing to respond to," Zelnoth said sharply. "The Council has spoken. You will comply or face the consequences." Claire's smile never wavered. 30 days, she repeated. "Surely the Council, which has existed for thousands of years, can wait 1 month. Unless, of course, you're afraid of what we might say?" The chamber erupted in clicking, humming, and various other sounds of agitation. The idea that the Council might fear anything from humanity was absurd. Insulting, even. Vorkath raised one massive hand, and silence fell. 30 days, he agreed, his voice carrying warning. "But understand this, Ambassador Martinez. When you return, you will either bend or you will break. The Council does not make empty threats." Claire nodded respectfully, though her eyes held something the Council members couldn't quite interpret. "Then we will see you in 30 days, and I promise you, Emperor, it will be a response worthy of this grand chamber." As the human delegation left, Claire activated her private communication device. "Admiral Hughes," she said quietly, "Protocol Neighborhood Watch is now active." On the other end, Admiral Frank Hughes of Earth Defense Command replied, "Understood. Let's remind the galaxy what humans do best." Behind them, the Galactic Council began planning their inevitable military response, certain of their overwhelming superiority. They had no idea that humanity's real strength had never been measured in weapons. The Galactic Council's intelligence network moved into action the moment the human delegation left Geneva. In a secure facility orbiting the Vorthak homeworld, analysts pored over every scrap of data they could gather about Earth's military capabilities. What they found both relieved and puzzled them. Commander Vixel of Council Intelligence stood before a massive display showing Earth's defensive capabilities. His segmented body clicked softly as he gestured to the data. "This makes no sense," he muttered to his team. "They have approximately 800 combat-capable vessels, respectable for a young species, but nothing compared to our combined fleet of over 3,000 ships." "What about hidden weapons?" asked his assistant, a floating creature surrounded by a field of bioluminescent organs. "Sure, they must have secret defenses if they laughed at our ultimatum." Vixel scrolled through more reports. "Our scans show no planet-destroying weapons, no dimensional disruptors, no quantum bombs. Their most powerful weapons are conventional missiles and energy cannons. Effective, but nothing we haven't seen before." He paused, his antennae twitching in confusion. "They've spent 80 years in space, and this is all they've built?" What the Council didn't see, because they weren't looking for it, was happening across 47 human colonies scattered through the stars. In the command center of Earth Defense Network headquarters, Admiral Frank Hughes sat at his desk, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. His graying hair and weathered face spoke of long years in service, but his eyes remained sharp as he worked through a list of names. These weren't military targets or strategic positions. They were people. Families, friends. "Computer," he said calmly. "Open channel to Colony Director Walsh on New Portland." Thousands of light years away, Captain Jenny Walsh was overseeing the weekly supply distribution when her communicator chimed. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s who had spent the last 15 years turning New Portland from a barren rock into a thriving community of 30,000 souls. Only 10,000 of those souls were human. "Admiral," she answered, stepping away from the busy marketplace where humans, Krelin, and half a dozen other species bartered and traded. "I heard about the Council's ultimatum." "Are we evacuating?" "No," Hughes replied. "I'm activating Protocol Neighborhood Watch. I need you to remember who your neighbors are." Jenny looked around the marketplace. She saw Marcus Chen haggling with a Krelin trader over the price of medicine. The trader's family had fled here during their civil war 12 years ago. She saw the group of young Krelon children playing with human kids, their games requiring no translation. She saw Dr. Lisa Park teaching a mixed class of students about emergency medical procedures. "I remember, sir," Jenny said softly. "I remember very well." On the agricultural colony of Riverbend, Paul Martinez stood in a vast greenhouse that stretched for miles under a protective dome. The plants growing here weren't from Earth. They were Lithian food crops, adapted through years of careful work to grow in conditions the silicon-based Lithians could never have managed on their own. Paul was Claire Martinez's younger brother, though they hadn't seen each other in person for 3 years. While she negotiated with words, he built bridges with seeds and soil. His communicator buzzed with a message from Earth Defense Command, but he was already having a conversation he knew was coming. "You heard about the Council," said Keeper Silanth, a Lithian whose crystalline body refracted light into rainbow patterns. "They demand you leave." Paul looked at his friend and colleague. 5 years ago, the Lithian homeworld had been dying. Their traditional underground farming had failed due to seismic changes in their planet's crust. Paul and his team had arrived with a simple offer: "Let us teach you to grow food on the surface." It had seemed impossible. Lithians needed specific mineral compositions that surface soil simply didn't have. 18 months of failures, then a breakthrough.
Then hope. Then abundance.
"The Council can demand whatever they want," Paul said, pulling off his work gloves. "But I'm not leaving unless you want me to go." Silent's body hummed, a sound that Paul had learned meant deep emotion. "We do not want you to go. When the famine came, the Council told us to reduce our population to sustainable levels."
"You taught us there was another way," Paul nodded. "Then I guess we have a problem."
"Because I don't think the Council is going to just let this slide." In the medical research station orbiting the colony world of Haven, Dr. Helen Price was reviewing test results when her assistant burst into the lab. The assistant was Yotan, a species with 4 arms and an extraordinary attention to detail. "Dr. Price, the news feeds are saying Earth might go to war with the Council," the assistant said, his voice high with worry. "What will happen to us?" "To the research?" Helen stopped what she was doing and gave her full attention to her assistant. The Yotan people had nearly been wiped out 8 years ago by a plague that attacked their unique nervous system. Council medical teams had studied it, declared it too complex to solve quickly, and offered the Yotan comfortable quarantine worlds to die upon with dignity. Helen and her team had arrived 6 months into the crisis. They didn't have fancy equipment or centuries of research. What they had was stubbornness and a refusal to accept that 30 million beings should die just because solving their problem was difficult. They had worked for 19 months straight. They had failed 63 times. On the 64th attempt, they had found an answer. Not a perfect cure, but enough to stop the dying. Then they had improved it. And they had shared it freely, refusing payment, asking only that the Yotan people help distribute it to their own worlds. "Listen to me carefully," Helen said, putting her hands on her assistant's shoulders. "I don't know what's going to happen with the Council, but I do know this. Humans don't abandon their friends. We didn't leave when your people were dying. We're not leaving now, back on Earth." Admiral Hughes continued making calls. Each one was brief. Each one asked the same thing. "Remember who your neighbors are. Remember what we built together. Remember why we came to the stars." The Council saw colonies as territory. They saw expansion as conquest. They measured success in systems controlled and resources claimed. They had never understood that humans measured success differently. In the 80 years since reaching the stars, humanity had built 800 warships. But they had also built 12,000 medical clinics on alien worlds. They had trained 50,000 alien students in human universities. They had shared crop technology that fed billions. They had offered shelter to refugees that the Council deemed too troublesome to help. Every human colony was a mixture of species. Every trade agreement included provisions for fair labor. Every treaty came with offers of educational exchange and cultural sharing. It was inefficient by Council standards. It was messy and complicated and sometimes frustratingly slow. But it had created something the Council had never anticipated. Something their intelligence networks couldn't quantify or their analysts couldn't measure on a spreadsheet. On the mining station of Deep Iron, human miners worked alongside Krelon refugees. On the research colony of New Cambridge, human scientists collaborated with Lithian engineers. On the trade hub of Crossroads, human merchants helped newly spacefaring species navigate galactic commerce without being exploited. 37 colonies, hundreds of thousands of humans, and millions of aliens who no longer saw humans as strangers but as neighbors, as friends. Admiral Hughes, finished his last call, and sat back in his chair. He pulled up a star map showing human space. Each colony was marked with a blue dot. Then he activated a secondary layer showing ship movements from the past 72 hours. New contacts were appearing. Ships from species the Council barely acknowledged, freighters changing course, defense fleets repositioning, all of them moving slowly toward human space. Hughes allowed himself a small smile. The Council thought they were facing 800 human ships. They had no idea what was really coming. Protocol Neighborhood Watch wasn't a military operation. It was simply a reminder to remember friendship, and across dozens of worlds, millions of beings were remembering very well indeed. Emperor Vorkath stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the final preparations of the Council Armada. 3,000 warships stretched across the void, representing the combined military might of 8 civilizations. It was the largest fleet assembled in over 2 centuries, and it existed for one purpose: to remind humanity of its place. "All vessels report ready," Emperor announced his tactical officer. "We await your command to proceed to Earth." Vorkath nodded slowly. In his long life, he had seen many species rise and fall. The pattern was always the same. Young civilizations reached the stars full of confidence and energy. They pushed boundaries, ignored warnings, and believed themselves special. Then reality taught them humility, usually at terrible cost. He didn't hate humanity. He simply understood that some lessons could only be learned through overwhelming force. "Set course for Earth," he commanded. "We depart in 3 days." Across the Council territories, the news spread quickly. Most citizens supported the action. Humanity had been warned. They had been offered a chance to join the galactic community properly. Their refusal left no choice. On the Vortak homeworld, news broadcasts showed military analysts discussing the coming confrontation with casual certainty. "Human military technology is approximately 200 years behind Council standards," explained one analyst, his scales gleaming under studio lights. "Their 800 ships cannot withstand our 3,000. This will be resolved quickly and with minimal Council casualties." What none of them noticed were the small irregularities appearing in shipping reports, independent freighters changing routes, vessels from minor civilizations requesting unusual navigation permits, ships moving through space with no clear destination listed in official records. Council Intelligence Officer Vixel noticed. He stood in his operations center, watching the tracking data with growing unease. His assistant floated beside him, bioluminescent patterns flashing with concern. "Commander, we've detected over 400 unauthorized ship movements in the past week," the assistant reported. "Most are from species we classify as non-aligned minor powers. The Kreelan refugee fleet, Lithian cargo vessels, Yotan medical ships, dozens of others." "Where are they going?" Vixel asked. "That's the strange part. They're all heading toward human space, but they're taking indirect routes, almost as if they don't want us to track them." The assistant pulled up more data. "We intercepted some communications, but they're using old encryption methods we don't usually bother monitoring. Mostly messages about remembering debts and honoring friendships." Vixel's antennae twitched. "They're fleeing. These minor species probably have trade relationships with humans and are evacuating before the conflict begins. Should we intercept them?" "No. Let them run. It makes our job easier if civilians clear the area." Vixel dismissed the data from his screen. "Focus on tracking the human military vessels. That's what matters." It was exactly the wrong conclusion, but Vixel couldn't be blamed for it. The Council had never valued the bonds humanity had been quietly building. They saw charity as weakness and friendship as irrelevant to real power. On the colony world of New Portland, Captain Jenny Walsh stood before a crowd, gathered in the main square. Humans and Kreelan filled the space, along with members of a dozen other species. The mood was tense but determined. "You all know what's happening," Jenny said, her voice amplified across the square. "The Galactic Council is sending a fleet to force Earth's surrender. They've given us an ultimatum: abandon our colonies and accept their authority, or face military action." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A Kreelan elder stepped forward, his scarred face showing the marks of old battles. "What will you do, Captain Walsh?" Jenny looked at the crowd, seeing faces she had known for years. The Kreelan family that ran the bakery on 5th Avenue. The human teacher who had married a Lithian engineer. The mixed group of teenagers who had grown up together, never seeing their different origins as barriers. "Earth hasn't ordered us to evacuate," she said. "Admiral Hughes activated something called Protocol Neighborhood Watch. He asked me to remember who our neighbors are." She smiled. "I remember very well. Do you?" The Kreelan elder's expression shifted. He turned to his people, speaking in their clicking language. Then he switched to common tongue. 12 years ago, the Kreelan Rebellion drove us from our homes. We fled with nothing. No food. No medicine. Our children were dying. The council offered us quarantine camps and said we should be grateful. His voice grew stronger, but humans came instead. Captain Walsh's ship arrived with medical supplies and no weapons. You helped us when we had nothing to offer in return. You taught our children in your schools. You gave us land to build our homes. You treated us not as refugees, but as neighbors. Another Kreelan stepped forward, younger, wearing a maintenance worker's uniform. I was sick and scared. A human doctor named Lisa Park stayed with me for 3 days straight until the fever broke. She sang me songs in a language I didn't understand, but I felt safe. More voices joined. A Lithian spoke about Paul Martinez teaching their people to farm in new ways. A Yotan medical worker talked about Dr. Helen Price, refusing to give up when everyone else said their plague was unsolvable. Story after story, memory after memory. Jenny felt emotion tightening her throat. So here's what we're going to do. We're not evacuating. We're not hiding. We're standing together, whatever comes.
The Kreelan elder nodded.
Then you should know something, Captain. We sent a message to our homeworld 3 days ago. The Civil War ended 2 years back, and our people remember who helped us. The Kreelan Defense Fleet is coming. Jenny's eyes widened. You don't have to do that. This isn't your fight. You made it our fight when you chose to help us instead of ignoring us like the Council did, the Elder replied. We pay our debts. Similar scenes were playing out across human space. On Riverbend, Lithian Coordinator Prime was making calls to the Lithian High Assembly. On Haven, Yotan Speaker Mira was broadcasting messages to every Yotan colony. On the trade station Crossroads, representatives from a dozen species were holding emergency meetings. The Council had assumed humanity stood alone. They had never counted the bonds created by 80 years of genuine friendship and mutual respect. Back on Earth, in a small office deep within Defense Command, Communications Officer Lisa Turner monitored incoming messages. She was young, barely 25, and had only been at this post for 6 months. She had expected her job to involve coordinating fleet movements and tracking military communications. Instead, her screen was filling with messages from across the galaxy. Ships declaring they were moving to support human space. Species offering supplies, medical aid, and in some cases military assistance. It was overwhelming. Admiral Hughes, she called out, her voice shaking slightly. You need to see this. Hughes walked over and looked at her display. His weathered face remained calm, but Lisa saw something flicker in his eyes. Pride, maybe, or vindication. How many ships are we tracking now? He asked quietly. Lisa checked her data. At least 2,000, sir. And more are joining every hour. The Kreelan sent their entire defense fleet. The Lithians are sending supply ships and construction vessels. The Yotan have mobilized medical frigates, and there are dozens of species I've never even heard of saying they're coming to stand with us. Hughes nodded slowly. The Council's fleet is 3,000 ships strong. They think they're bringing overwhelming force. But, sir, we only have 800 combat vessels, Lisa said. Even with Allied support, this is going to be close. People are going to die. Maybe, Hughes agreed, or maybe the Council is about to learn something they should have understood a long time ago. He returned to his desk and opened a secure channel to Ambassador Claire Martinez in Geneva. Ambassador, it's time. The stage is set. Are you ready to give the Council their answer? On the other end, Claire's voice came through calm and confident. I've been ready since they made their ridiculous demands, Admiral. Let's show them what humanity really built out here among the stars. The 30-day deadline was approaching. The Council fleet was moving toward Earth with absolute confidence in their superiority. And all across human space, thousands of ships from dozens of species were quietly converging, drawn by bonds the Council had never thought to measure. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon had never been military might. It was something far more powerful, the ability to see strangers and choose to make them friends. 6 months had passed since the day the Council fleet arrived at Earth, expecting surrender, and found something entirely different. The Grand Chamber in Geneva had been expanded 3 times to accommodate all the new members, and today it was filled to capacity with representatives from species that had once been dismissed as too small or too insignificant to matter. Ambassador Claire Martinez stood at the central podium, looking out at what they now called the Galactic Coalition for Cooperative Advancement. The name was a mouthful, but it represented something revolutionary. Decisions were no longer made by the 8 most powerful civilizations and imposed on everyone else. Now every member had a voice, and consensus was required for major actions. It was messy. It was slow, it was frequently frustrating. It was also far more just than what had come before. The Council recognizes Coordinator Prime of the Lithian Assembly, Claire said, gesturing to the crystalline being who approached the speaker's platform. Prime's body chimed softly as he addressed the chamber. I bring a proposal from the newly established Agricultural Cooperation Initiative. We have 43 species now sharing farming techniques and crop genetics. The Yotan have a method of vertical farming that could help the Krex people on their desert worlds. The humans have offered to send teachers to demonstrate the techniques. A Krex representative, a being covered in thick fur adapted for harsh climates, stood up. The Krex gratefully accept this offer. We have struggled with food production for generations. The old council told us our world was simply not suited for large populations, and we should consider migration. The old council solved problems by telling people to give up, Paul Martinez said from his seat in the human delegation. He had been named head of the agricultural initiative despite his protest that he was just a farmer. The new coalition solves problems by sharing what works. The proposal passed with unanimous support. It was the 17th such cooperation agreement approved in the past month. Education exchanges, medical research partnerships, technology sharing programs. The galaxy was learning to work together in ways that seemed impossible just months ago. In the military section of the chamber, Admiral Frank Hughes sat beside former enemy Commander Vixel, who had been reassigned from Council Intelligence to Coalition Security Coordination. Their job was to ensure that the transition from the old system to the new one didn't create dangerous power vacuums. We have a situation developing in Sector 7, Vixel reported when called upon. A rogue faction of Vorthak military officers are refusing to accept the new coalition structure. They've seized 3 ships and are making demands that the old council be restored. The chamber tensed. This was the 13th such incident since the coalition formed. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Some species had benefited greatly from the old hierarchy and resented losing their privileged position. Before anyone could speak, Emperor Vorkath himself stood. The ancient ruler had surprised everyone by not only accepting the new order but becoming one of its strongest advocates. His transformation from demanding humanity's surrender to supporting their vision had been the subject of countless news stories across the galaxy. These are my people making these demands, Vorkath said, his deep voice carrying easily through the chamber. I will handle this matter personally. With respect, Emperor, Hughes said carefully, perhaps this should be addressed by the coalition collectively. We need to establish that no single species handles enforcement alone. Vorkath considered this, then nodded slowly. You are correct, Admiral. I allowed my pride to speak first. He turned to the chamber. I propose a joint response team. Vortak negotiators to speak with our own people, supported by coalition observers to demonstrate this is not the old way of doing things. I volunteer to be an observer, said Talarine from the Kreelan delegation. My people know what it means to have internal conflict tear us apart. Perhaps that experience will be useful. The proposal was accepted, and the response team was formed within the hour. It was exactly the kind of cooperative solution that would have been impossible under the old council. Back then, the Vorthak would have handled their rogue elements with overwhelming force and no outside input. Now they were asking for help and accepting oversight. Dr. Helen Price stood to present the Medical Cooperation Network's monthly report. We've made significant progress on the Centauri virus that's been affecting silicon-based life forms. By combining Lithian biological knowledge with Yotan medical techniques and human pharmaceutical research, we've developed a treatment that shows 92% effectiveness. She pulled up data showing infection rates dropping across affected worlds. More importantly, we've established a rapid response protocol. When the next health crisis emerges, and there will be a next time, we'll have 40 species worth of medical expertise ready to collaborate immediately, instead of each working in isolation. The medical network saved 12,000 lives last month that would have been lost under the old system. This is what the coalition means in practice. Not just words and treaties, but actual beings alive today who wouldn't be without cooperation. Lisa Turner, who had been promoted to Coalition Communications Director despite her young age, presented updates on the Public Information Network. We're receiving messages from species who aren't yet part of the coalition asking how they can join. I have applications from 17 civilizations in the past week alone. What's the process for admission? Asked a representative from one of the newer member species. Claire fielded that question. We're still developing the formal process, but the basic principle is simple. Species must commit to the core values of cooperation over domination, sharing over hoarding, and consensus over unilateral action. They must agree to contribute to coalition efforts based on their capabilities and to receive support when they need it. It sounds idealistic, observed Ambassador Zelnoth, who had also undergone a significant change in perspective over the past months. Perhaps too idealistic. 6 months ago, you would have been right, Claire admitted. But we've proven it works. Is it perfect? No. Is it sometimes frustratingly slow? Absolutely. But it's better than what we had. The session continued for several more hours, addressing everything from trade dispute mediation to joint scientific expeditions. When it finally adjourned, Claire found herself walking through the Geneva Gardens with Emperor Vorkath. The massive being moved slowly, his age showing in ways it hadn't 6 months ago. I owe you an apology, Ambassador Martinez, Vorkath said quietly. When I arrived at Earth with my fleet, I was so certain of my rightness, so convinced that the old ways were the only ways that worked. Claire shook her head. You don't need to apologize, Emperor. You did what you thought was necessary to maintain order. You weren't wrong that the galaxy needed structure. You were just wrong about what kind of structure would work best. I brought 3,000 warships to intimidate you into submission, Vorkath said. Instead, you showed me 8,000 ships that came because their crews wanted to stand beside you. It was the most profound military defeat I've ever experienced, and not a single shot was fired. They reached a bench overlooking a pond, and Vorkath settled onto it with a sigh. In my long life, I have conquered 17 star systems. I have won 32 major battles. I have ruled an empire for 4 centuries. And yet the most important lesson I ever learned came from a species barely a century old in space. What lesson was that? Claire asked, sitting beside him. That true strength isn't measured in ships or weapons or territory controlled, Vorkath replied. It's measured in bridges built and friendships earned and trust established. Your species understood instinctively what my people took millennia to learn, if we've truly learned it even now. Across the galaxy, the changes continued to ripple outward. On New Portland, human and Kreelan children attended integrated schools without thinking twice about their different origins. On Riverbend, Lithian and human engineers worked side by side developing new agricultural techniques. On Haven, medical researchers from a dozen species collaborated on problems that had seemed unsolvable when each worked alone. The Rogue Vortak faction surrendered peacefully after negotiations with the Joint Response Team. They weren't punished, but instead were offered positions helping to build the new security framework. Several accepted. Admiral Hughes stood in Earth Defense Command, looking at the strategic display showing Coalition space. It had grown significantly in 6 months. Not through conquest or intimidation, but through invitation and willing membership. Admiral, we're receiving a first contact signal, Lisa Turner reported. It's from a species that just achieved faster-than-light travel. They're asking who they should talk to about joining galactic civilization. Hughes smiled. Send them the standard welcome package. Let them know they have options now. They can join the coalition based on cooperation and mutual benefit, or they can try to go it alone, but make sure they understand what each choice really means. The message went out, and across coalition space, hundreds of species went about their daily lives, building something that 6 months ago had seemed impossible. A galactic civilization based not on who had the biggest weapons or the most territory, but on who was willing to help when help was needed and share when sharing would lift everyone up. Ambassador Zelnoth stood in his quarters that evening looking at his reflection. He barely recognized the being staring back at him. 6 months ago, he had been certain that humanity needed to be controlled, that their chaos would destroy everything the Council had built. Now he served on 3 different coalition committees and found himself actually enjoying the work. His communicator chimed. It was his daughter from the homeworld. Father, I've been accepted into the Human University Exchange Program. I'll be studying comparative government on Earth for a year. Zelnoth felt something unfamiliar. Genuine happiness. That's wonderful news. Learn everything you can. The future belongs to people who understand cooperation. After the call ended, he pulled up the recording of Claire Martinez's laughter from that first day in the council chamber. At the time it had seemed like mockery. Now he understood it differently. She hadn't been laughing at the council's power. She had been laughing because she knew something they didn't. She knew that humanity had spent 80 years planting seeds of friendship across the galaxy. She knew those seeds had grown into something strong enough to change everything. She knew that when the test came, humanity wouldn't stand alone. The Galactic Council had demanded humanity's surrender, bringing overwhelming force to ensure compliance. But Earth had only laughed because they understood what the Council had missed. Power shared is power multiplied. Friendship is stronger than fear, and the greatest strength any civilization can have is the ability to turn strangers into family. 6 months later, the galaxy was learning that humanity had been right all along.